Good afternoon. I'd like to call the April 17th, 2012 City Council meeting to order. Will you please rise with me for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Francisco?
Here.
Hotchkiss? Here. House?
Here.
Murillo?
Here.
Rouse? Here. White? And Mayor Schneider.
Here. Okay, are there any changes to the agenda?
No, there aren't, Madam Mayor.
Okay. Move on to public comment. I have 2 minutes here at the podium. We'll start with John Dome. Will be followed by Kenneth Locke.
Good afternoon, Mayor Schneider, members of the City Council. My name is John Dome. I'm with Crown Castle. We own and manage wireless infrastructure, but I'm here today on behalf of the California Wireless Association. Our association is a nonprofit professional association, and one of the purposes is to promote positive working relationships between the communities we serve and the wireless industry. As you may know, the second week of April each year has been designated by Congress as the National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week. This event honors the thousands of men and women who answer emergency calls, dispatch emergency professionals and equipment, and provide information and reassurance to citizens in times of need. The California Wireless Association would like to take this opportunity to recognize the pivotal role played by these folks, these dispatchers, communications operators, radio control personnel, whatever your title might be, who utilize telephones, radios, computers, and technical skill to provide support to law enforcement, fire services, emergency services, and other governmental field personnel. The work of these unseen first responders is invaluable in emergency situations, and each of these dedicated men and women deserve our heartfelt appreciation. As you know, emergencies can happen at any time, so these people have to be ready 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. We in the wireless industries are also extremely proud to have a key role in providing the wireless infrastructure and systems that make the dedication of these heroes effective. You may note that today over 30% of American homes only have a wireless device as their telephone, and over 70% of 911 calls come from wireless devices. Many situations where a lack of coverage would mean these calls for help would go unanswered.
You need to wind up, please.
So thank you for your support. Mr. Sanchez, if you could pass on our remarks to your staff, we'd appreciate it. Thank you for your help, and thank you for listening.
Thank you. Kenneth Locke will be followed by Annie McGill.
My name is Kenneth Locke. I just did this sign today. It kind of came to me. It says, stupid is not sustainable. And it turns out that I had this other, maybe I was going to do a sign that says a little knowledge is dangerous kind of situation. And that's kind of the age that we're living in right now. People really don't have a complete understanding of actually what they're actually getting involved in. And it turns out that our society, the human race, whatever, for a long time, is going to come to realize that what it invested itself into, again, is not sustainable. Then, a house divided will fall kind of situation. I don't think this house actually ever stood. And when this house falls, we're actually going to realize that it actually technically didn't stand. But like when it comes to the arts, like the art market, completely delusional. Our sports markets, all these markets that actually I'm sorry to say that the money that you make is actually connected to, because this place is pretty much all connected. So when you have say a market which is completely wacko, say, delusional, has no educational value, is not interested in education or becoming intelligent, somebody should throw the flag. And that's probably what your position is here for the community, is to recognize something that enters into the community, which is not in the best interest of the community, throw the flag. It's kind of biblical. It says if your brother offends you, you go to him. And you go to him, and then if he still continues, you bring 7 people or whatever type of thing. There's 7 of you? Okay. Just thought I'd share that. Thank you.
Annie McGill will be followed by David Selberg, and the final speaker will be Nicholas Beltran.
Madam Mayor and council members, I ride the shuttles. I use the State Street shuttle and I use the beach shuttles. During the spring break, which I know we can't satisfy everybody's spring break across the country, I went down to use the beach shuttle and waited for a half an hour for it to come. So I said to the driver, "What's up? What's going on?" He said, "We only have one shuttle, and all these people are coming on spring break, and we can't handle it." What I'd like is for someone to look at the calendar and realize that, oh, maybe we need 2 shuttles at the beach when there are a lot of tourists in town. The Visitors Bureau is spending lots of money to bring people into town, and they're not getting the service they need down at the beach. That shuttle only holds maybe 20 people top, 25. There were 20 and 25 people waiting at the stop already. And then when the shuttle from State Street came down, they dumped on another 5 or 10 people. So I'd like somebody to look at that shuttle service when there is peak time for vacations or spring breaks or Christmas breaks or whatever it might be. That's it.
Actually, it's the Metropolitan Transit District that is in charge of the shuttle program, not the city, although we do fund a big portion of it. I know Councilmember Murillo is the liaison to MTD, and I'm sure she'll relay that message, or feel free to contact Sherry Fisher at MTD directly, too. But we certainly heard your comments.
I'll call Sherry.
Okay. Thank you.
And Kathy, you'll back me up?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
There you go. David Selberg.
Madam Mayor, the person whose name you called after mine is willing to give his 2 minutes to me, if
Sure.
that's possible.
Okay.
Great. That would be
You have
Aaron.
4 minutes.
Great. Hello, I'm David Selberg, Executive Director of the Gay and Lesbian, Bisexual, Transgendered, and HIV/AIDS organization in Santa Barbara County. We're one of the largest such organizations in the state of California. The largest ever community survey within the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered communities occurred about 3 years ago. Hundreds of community members responded from all ethnicities, income levels, faiths, abilities, ages, and every zip code within Santa Barbara County and a bit beyond. The number one top issue shared was fear of harassment and violence related to sexual orientation and gender identity. Incidentally, the second most important issue was LGBT civil rights advocacy. Both Jared Schwartz, the Director of Just Communities, and I met with Chief Cam Sanchez to share these results, address concerns, and build stronger bridges with local law enforcement. The Chief showed 100% support, commitment, and understanding, sharing both personal and professional resolve towards safety for the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered communities. Pacific Pride, with community partners, Just Communities, and the UCSB Department of Counseling and Psychology, developed a truly state-of-the-art LGBT sensitivity training with input from hundreds of community members and actual patrol officers, motorcycle cops, and detectives. The Chief gave our team access to police team briefings with officers on all shifts with the Santa Barbara PD. This past winter, every sworn officer of the Santa Barbara Police Department attended a 5-hour training in better serving the LGBT communities. Additionally, police department civilian staff attended, and Chief Sanchez outreached to sheriff, highway patrol, probation, and other police departments throughout the county for their participation. And many of these other law enforcement groups attended. Well before the 1969 Stonewall riots, which is marked as the beginning of the LGBT civil rights movement, with decades of horrible anti gay abuse, brutal police roundups, the destroying of people's lives in the newspapers, and so much more. The LGBT communities have traditionally never felt protected or safe in approaching law enforcement. It's part of our history. Hate crimes nationally are grossly underreported. Our trainings covered such basics as respectful language and communication when engaging the LGBT communities, role-playing among officers with real-life scenarios involving bullying, hate crimes, traffic stops, and more. Next steps are being planned with the established partnership, which include LGBT and police town forums, and new outreach to other law enforcement groups and the county for expanding these trainings. The chief is currently advocating for the inclusion of this LGBT curriculum to the Southern California Police Academy in Oxnard. Following a recent horrific New Year's Eve gay hate crime in downtown Santa Barbara, police detectives shared with me directly how useful the LGBT trainings were in assisting them with a very active and ongoing investigation. So I want to thank the Chief of Police of Santa Barbara, Chief Sanchez, for your ongoing partnership and goals toward continuing to work with our community. You have all my respect and the respect of those I represent. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes public comment. Move on to the consent calendar, and there's some items to read.
Item number 2, introduction of ordinance for agreements to use recycled water. Recommendation that council introduce and subsequently adopt by reading of title only an ordinance of the council of the city of Santa Barbara approving the agreements between the city of Santa Barbara and Pilgrim Terrace Homes, Montecito Country Club, 19th District Agricultural Association, and Santa Barbara Zoological Foundation to use the city's recycled water system for delivery of the city's recycled water. Item number 3, addition of police business manager in the police department. Recommendation that council adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the council of the city of Santa Barbara amending resolution number 11-049, the position and salary control resolution for fiscal year 2012, affecting the police department effective April 17th, 2012.
Thank you. Without further objection, we'll waive further reading. The number 3 you just read, and I know Mr. Hotchkiss wanted to pull that out. Any other items to pull from the consent? Okay. Mr. Hotchkiss on number 3.
Chief Sanchez, those are nice plaudits you got earlier. Congratulations. My question on this is, would a business manager help us to avoid, for lack of a better expression, the Karen Flores situations in the future?
I certainly would hope so. And a few years ago, we did have that business manager position. And a few years ago, we decided that due to some changes in the organization and budget constraints, that person retired. We felt that we could do some salary savings with that and do some other things with it, and we did that. We are currently looking at a list of a few folks who are going to be interviewed next week and the following week, and we'll make that determination on who that is. I believe after analysis by finance, the auditors, my department, myself, and my staff, this would be a tremendous assistance to us to have that manager in between the two groups that were not managed, and we feel that this would be a great asset to us. So based on the audits and the investigation, we feel this would be an appropriate time to do this and bring that position back into the fold, if you will.
Okay, the reason I ask is that people want reassurance that we're making sure that this never happens again, and this is part of the plan.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Anything else on the consent calendar? Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
There is.
Moved.
Okay. Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Report from the Finance Committee, Mr. Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The Finance Committee met today and heard with delight a projected schedule of Finance Committee meetings on the upcoming budget.
Okay, then. And item number 6, speaking of the budget.
Item number 6, fiscal year 2013, recommended operating and capital budget.
Okay. Mr. Armstrong, do you want to start this off?
Yes, Madam Mayor and members of the council, we're very pleased to present to you the proposed fiscal year 2013 budget. So this is for the period from July 1st of this year until June 30th next year. And as you know, last year we submitted to you a 2-year financial plan, and it was the first time we've done that in a while. to try and avoid as much work the second year. But at the time when we presented that budget to you in the general fund, we were projecting a deficit of $2.7 million. And we made a conscious decision to not determine how we would fill that gap at the time and project additional cuts to the organization, but instead to assess the economy, see if revenues improved, and then we would deal with the second year if we continue to have that gap in the springtime. And I think that was a wise decision because we did see our revenues rebound in a much more healthy way than we had expected. And we're able to close a lot of that gap that we had expected to have. And so when we present the budget to you today, it pretty much is the same level of services that we had projected for this year without any additional cuts or service level cuts. And so hopefully we can have a more abbreviated process this year than we had last year. Probably the biggest change in this year's budget, or the budget we're proposing to you, is the elimination of the redevelopment agency, which we had not anticipated last year. And you will see the impacts of that elimination in the general fund especially, and also in the proposed capital program, because essentially the capital program that we had hoped to fund with redevelopment has now gone away. But there's a lot of other places where it affected the organization in terms of the overhead that we were charging to the agency, several employees who were being reimbursed to the general fund through the redevelopment agency, and so we've had to make position changes there. A couple other items that Mr. Samario mentioned that also were a positive in the budget was the anticipated PERS expenses that we had thought we would have this year were, for police and fire especially, are slightly lower, and so that was a positive area that we're able to adjust budgets downward. And also in the health insurance area, we had expected higher cost, and we actually went out to bid on our health insurance in the fall and received lower costs than we expected, which so also helped us in terms of balancing the budget. The budget is balanced with some one-time monies, and we'll go through that with you. We think it's appropriate. It's not out of the general fund. It's actually through scouring other funds of the city where we were able to move some money over to balance for next year. So essentially what you have is a status quo budget. I do want to caution you, we're not out of the woods. We still have some difficult challenges ahead. One, we do expect PERS costs to go up again in fiscal year 14 and 15, and so we're going to have to prepare for that. Also, the issue of the RDA going away not just affects us in the short term, but makes our infrastructure financing issues even more challenging in the years ahead, because we pulled out at least $30 million of tax increment that we expected to receive that's just no longer going to be available. But overall, I think we're pleased to present this budget to you that doesn't result in any significant changes to services. So it is pretty much a status quo budget. And I'm going to let Bob kind of walk you through the numbers. Before Bob starts, I also do want to recognize Bob and his staff, who have done as usual, a very fantastic job of putting the budget together. Bob, his budget manager, Michael Peace, Jill Tara, they got a new analyst, Diego Martin, Jonathan downstairs, all of them. You could come in here at night and on weekends, and they were working to put this document together. Actually didn't have to work as many hours as we had to last year, but still put in a lot of extra hours to make sure that the document you receive is as accurate as possible. So I do want to give them my compliments. And with that, I'll turn it over to Bob to kind of walk you through some of the key numbers.
Thank you, Mr. Armstrong. I'm not sure there's much left to say. That was a great summary. Bob Samario, Finance Director. So I am going to go through the budget in a very overview fashion, and there are a lot of details in here, and each department will have a chance to come before you and talk about their respective budgets. The purpose of the day is just to give you a broad overview. We're obviously going to spend a lot more time on the general fund versus the enterprise funds, but again, a broad overview of really the same themes that Mr. Armstrong mentioned. I assume you have the document in front of you, and I think what's important for you to know is that this is obviously a lot smaller than the version you saw last year. This is considered technically an addendum to that document, so you won't see all the information you typically would see. We start with the second year of the two-year financial plan. When we put the two-year plan together, we had fiscal year 12 and 13. So the numbers you'll see actually start with the 2013 numbers contained in that original document, and then show you what those adjustments are that we are proposing, at least, to get to the recommended budget. So that's the reference. You won't see a lot of details in the departmental section, mostly performance information, performance measurement information, but it's really summary information in the front and then some P3s in the back, but lacking in all detail, and for obvious reasons, because we want to avoid that second. The whole purpose of doing a two-year financial plan is to avoid a production of two documents or a document like that every year. So that's sort of our reference point, and just to also give you a sense of what the document looks like. So I'm going to go through a quick overview of citywide numbers, focus mostly on the general fund. I'll touch on enterprise funds, and then I'll go through the public review schedule we're proposing that we'd be asking you to approve, and then we'll just make some concluding comments. So you can see this is sort of a vertical representation of what's in the summary schedule in the front of that document, showing each of the funds. I've combined them by fund, what is called fund type. We have one general fund, but we have multiple funds within the other categories. We have a number of special revenue funds, a number of enterprise funds, and a number of internal service funds. And just wanted to give you kind of the magnitude of each. But at the far right, you can see that our budget is a pretty sizable budget. It's over $250 million. Toward the middle, you see the operating budget. That's the planned expenditures for next year, totaling $252.3 million. So it's not a small budget. You know, it seems like a small city, but we actually operate like a big city in some ways. I wanted to also to show you that these are the numbers in total for the operating budget for each of those fund categories. So just to show you that the numbers really haven't changed that much as we expected. As Mr. Armstrong indicated, it's the idea is to sort of maintain status quo. At the far right, you'll see that in total we went down by about $6 million, and I would say most of that relates to the elimination of the redevelopment agency. Otherwise, had it not been for that, we would see very, very small changes. Yeah, that reduction from $252 million at the far right, let me see if I can point to it. This is what we're now proposing. This is what the original plan contained. So that decline of about $6 million, almost all relates to the elimination of the RDA. Had it not been for that, we would see a much smaller change. Even with that, it's about a 2% change from what the proposed plan said and what we're recommending today. Just to kind of give you the order of magnitude and relationship between all of those budgets, the general fund is clearly the largest individual fund. All enterprise funds combined are still less than the general fund at 40%. Our special revenue funds, such as our Creeks Fund, our Measure A Fund, our CDBG Fund, they represent in total 12% of our overall operating budgets. And then our internal service funds represent 6% of the total. And then our capital program this year, we're proposing, or for at least for next year, we're proposing about a $19.8 million capital program. Enterprise funds, as usual, has the largest share of that. Special revenue funds, because that includes a lot of our streets operations, includes $5.6 million for capital. And the general fund, $625. It's a little lower than we would like to see, but consistent with the at least recent years. Taking a look at the positions, this is citywide, and you'll see that this is sort of a look from 1999, and I skipped some years in here just because you'll see why. I skipped from 99 to 2006, but overall we've been in an incline all the way up to 2009, which we hit the peak, and then since then we've been reducing our positions citywide. We are now recommending 999 positions, which is a reduction from the peak of 89 positions, but about where we were, exactly where we were back in about 14 years ago. So focusing on the general fund, as this is sort of an overview, and Mr. Armstrong kind of covered this, but we believe the economy has improved, at least locally. We've seen that in our sales tax and our bed tax revenues, and we'll take a look at some of those numbers, even some recent numbers for our bed tax revenues for March. Property taxes and other taxes have not grown. They're still very flat. In some cases, they've actually gone down from what we originally thought and what we're recommending now. But clearly, sales tax and bed tax have been the stars and have really helped us to eliminate that deficit we originally projected last year. So as Mr. Armstrong indicated, we once thought we had a $2.7 million deficit next year. It's now down to about $880,000. And not only the strong revenue growth, but of course we have seen a reduction in the growth in our PERS retirement contributions. Last year, PERS gave us an estimate for 2013. That estimate still was an increase from this year, but their estimate now has been adjusted for actual rates, and those rates are slightly lower in police and fire and a little bit higher in miscellaneous. But on a net basis, we're seeing a savings from those final rates for next year. And then lastly, we are balanced with some one-time funds for that $180,000 deficit. This will be next year the first time in 3 years that we won't need salary and benefit concessions from all of our labor groups to address the general fund deficits, which that's good news. So we're not including any proposed concessions for next year. And then, of course, we do have the big sort of change, which is the elimination of the RDA. And this has impacted the general fund by about $1.2 million. We think that there's some other impacts that are possible or likely. Fortunately, one of the small slivers or silver lining is that with the elimination of the RDA, the tax increment that used to go to the RDA, a portion of that will now be spread out to all the agencies, including the city. And so we're expecting next year to receive about $1.5 million, which will offset the $1.2 million impacts that we know about. It won't necessarily cover all the potential impacts, as we'll see in a moment. So this is our general fund, just to kind of show you, what we had included in the original plan, which was in the 2-year document, what we're just recommending in the aggregate, and then what our recommended budget looks like. As Mr. Armstrong indicated, we actually left the second year unbalanced. It was a $2.7 million deficit. Clearly, that has gone down. We are left with only a $364,000, not a deficit. It's just a use of reserves, and this is part of the one-time money we have available. These are savings in our capital fund that we are able to identify, and we figured we might as well use those to fund the 625 capital program down below. But otherwise, we are balanced, with the exception of the other one-time monies. That 625, by the way, does not include $400,000 that the general fund is contributing toward a citywide financial management system replacement project. It's being actually accounted for and handled by Information Systems. It's an internal service fund, and each fund, including the general fund, contributes toward that project. And our share is $400,000. That number is actually part of our operating budget, since it's not a general fund capital per se. It's just contributing to capital in the IS fund. Looking at our revenues, this is a chart you've all seen, and this is for new council members primarily. You can see the breakdown of the general fund revenues. Most of it is taxes. What was good to see is that when I updated this chart, because I do this every year, last year this was about 61%, so our taxes has grown, has become a larger proportion of our overall revenues, and that's kind of back to what it used to be. Interfund charges in the top, these are revenues we actually collected. Those are charges in large part to enterprise funds for like overhead and other things. And then one thing I also wanted to point out, we still are including in our budget $1.2 million. It's 1.1% of the budget for the, quote, anticipated year-end variance. We every year we end the year under budget on the expenditure side, and so we now just factor that into the budget, recognizing that it's, we'll never spend the full amount of the budget because of vacancies, turnovers in staff, and the like. At some point in the future, I think we'd like to get away from doing that. We've done that in the last few years because of the tight budgets, but in the future, we'd like to sort of just do away with that completely and let those surpluses fall to the bottom line for capital and other purposes. This is sort of a consolidation of charts or drafts you've seen in the past, where we wanted to look at, what has happened to sales taxes, bed tax, and property taxes over the last number of years. And it's hard to tell the distinguish the colors, but sales taxes is green. And what I wanted to show you that, obviously, the decline in several years ago, but we have been climbing steadily, but we're still now not back to where we were at the peak in 2007, where we were over $20 million. We're about $19 million. But again, we're still not fully recovered from the impacts of the recession of the last few years. In contrast, our bed taxes are now well above where we were at the peak. So that's great news, and it's just continuing to perform strongly, and you'll see the most recent data. Property taxes, they climbed, and never really declined like the others, but they've just flattened out. So we've seen just a continued lack of growth there, and we're projecting pretty much flat for the next couple of years. This is a detailed look at our sales tax revenues. This is 2011. It shows you the actual numbers and the actual growth in relation to 2010. So we are at almost $6 million. We grew 5.2%, which is really not bad. Obviously, this fourth quarter here was what really buoyed us and helped us to get there. Otherwise, we would have been in a 3.5% range. But that one quarter, which we have not seen that kind of growth in a quarter for a long time, really helped us, 11.1%. In this year, the first two quarters came in pretty strong, 8.4 and 9.7. I think those are historical growth rates, that, in the last 15 years or 10 years at least. We are still proposing or projecting the next two quarters to be 4.5%. I think that based on what we're seeing on the latest bed tax information, there's probably more upside potential there to exceed 4.5%, but just because it's, always better to be a little more conservative, we're projecting 4.5%. That would generate an overall 6.8% growth for the year. And then next year, sort of maintaining that moderate posture in terms of our projections, we're assuming a 4% growth, which would get us to $19.5 million in 2013. The original two-year document for next year proposed $18.3 million, so that's an increase of almost $1.2 million. So that's just what three strong quarters will do for us. I mean, it really makes a big difference when you're up 1 or 2% in relation to your projections. Bed tax or transient occupancy taxes, this shows what we were through February. You can see we've had in this current year some really strong months. And then we're projecting 6% for the remainder of the year. I just heard today that the month of March, came in at 14.9%. So really a good month. And as Ms. Tara said to me, it really gives us kind of some momentum going into the summer months. You'll see April, May, June. Those are some of our largest months, so we can see at least a 6% growth in those months. We're going to really be doing well, but those are where the big dollars are. Obviously, the beginning of the year, this growth we're seeing the last 2 months, 3 months, it's they're smaller months, but they're still it's a good growth rate. So we're looking pretty good, and we're optimistic for the remainder of the year. But at this point, our budget document reflects a 6% growth from March through June, and then a 6% growth for all of next year. And that would get us to about $14.3 million next year, which would be about $800,000 more than we originally anticipated last year.
May I ask a quick question?
Sure.
14% got everybody's attention.
Yes.
Have we seen anomalies like that in the past? Spring break, something? I don't know.
I have not looked at every single month for the last 15 years, but I'll bet we have not gotten there more than twice that high in a given month. That's unusual. That's really unusual.
Is it usually a springtime phenomenon, weather and...
Well, I don't know. I mean, it could be a lot of things. Good weather obviously made a big difference, but I would have expected more to be in the 6 or 7, 8% range, which is still really good. 14% is an anomaly. Our property taxes, as I said at the outset, very flat, been flat. We expect them to continue to be flat. You can see last year we were at 22.5%, at least for what we call the secured and unsecured portion. There's some other revenues we get in there for airplanes and a little bit of interest. We also get some money on what's called supplemental. That's when properties change hands between levy dates, and we get additional tax revenues. Last year, we received about $22.8 million. That's net of $550,000 charges from the county for processing, really collecting and administering the property tax program. This year, we're projecting about 22.9, and then next year, we're really just assuming about a 1% growth. We have no idea of knowing, but we do talk to the county, and their projections countywide, they really can't break it down within jurisdiction, but countywide, they're sort of saying about 1%. So we're going with that at this point. And I just wanted to point out that does not include the monies that I mentioned, $1.5 million we're getting in additional property taxes because of the RDA going away. That number doesn't reflect that, but it's going to become part of that, of course. So general fund expenditures, just to point out, where most of the money goes: fire, 21% of the budget, police, 34%, and you can see that it's sort of spread around. Parks and Rec is our third largest at 12%. This is a chart that shows you the changes between the originally adopted plan for 13 and what we're now recommending. You can see, for the most part, some steady, small adjustments, but there are some larger increases. I will say that at the outset that, the pension cost overall provided us some net savings, so that's going to be reflected in these numbers. We also saw a reduction in our health insurance costs for next year, at least what we're projecting. This year we actually went out and did an RFP, the HR folks, and just to kind of test the market, and we came back with our largest provider, Aetna, proposing a 0% rate increase for this January that we just had, so January 12, and we had assumed when we built the budget about a 10% rate increase. So obviously that immediately saves us 10% this year and 10% next year. So that's sort of spread out in all these numbers, some of those savings. Looking at individual departments, obviously the biggest reduction is in community development. And a lot of people don't know this, but the RDA staff are used to be in community development. We had 2 programs within their department in the general fund for housing and regular RDA. And with the elimination of the RDA, obviously those positions have either been eliminated, moved, or shifted, and we'll talk more about that. But that has resulted in a reduction of $1.1 million in their budget. And if you look at the bottom line, overall, the budget for the general fund as a whole has gone down by $1.2 million. So, obviously these all sort of net to almost zero. The biggest reduction is in community development. In the fire department, I just wanted to point out that there is no reduction in staffing here, no reduction in services, all of that and even more because their budget actually has grown from 2012, but that reduction is from the savings in PERS costs and health insurance premiums. In community promotions, that includes 2 increases. One, we've added about $380,000 to the appropriated reserves. When we identified the impacts to the general fund as a result of the RDA going away of $1.2 million, we also had about $1.5 million in additional property taxes. That difference, that surplus, if you will, we put into this appropriated reserve because it's really going to be a contingency. We're going to expect and will likely see other impacts as a result of the RDA going away. So we put that extra money aside, and it will likely go to other impacts. In the police department, again, with fire, reductions in PERS costs, health savings, there are no reductions in staff and no reductions in services. And as we'll see, we did shift some positions out to some grant funds in the police department, but again, no reduction in overall in the force whatsoever. I did want to point out, because I think it's important, that in community development, we did include $40,000 for funding for the rental housing mediation task force. This is at the reduced level, and they'll be talking about this, of course, when they present their budget. This is for information services only, so it is a reduced level, but we wanted to make sure you understood that it does provide some funding for that program. And this is a summary of positions. You can see that overall, in the general fund, we reduced positions by 15.36. This is a big change. Clearly, the RDA impact is in here of almost 12 positions. Citywide, we reduced positions by about 11.5 or almost 12. So clearly, you can see that if we reduce 15 in the general fund and 12 overall, it means that we shifted some positions out of the general fund and into other funds. But here the biggest impact is in the community development. I would say about 9 positions of that almost 12 relate to the RDA. The rest are just eliminations of positions that they had vacant or were planned to be deleted outside of the RDA impact. Let me back up. In the library, just shifting a couple of positions, we thought when we put together the 2-year financial plan that we were going to have a funding shortfall in the Carpinteria Library Program, which is part of the county library, not general fund. And so we shifted 20% of a position into the general fund. We don't need that now because the Friends of the Library has stepped up. So we're putting that back into the county library program. And then down below in the police department, as I indicated, we have shifted some positions into our grants fund. You may recall that when the state adopted its budget this year, they eliminated the small remaining amount of money we were receiving for vehicle license fees. We had budgeted $200,000 this year. They took that away. What we would have gotten, as we find out, would have been $300,000. So they took really $300,000 away from us. And as a partial offset, they provided additional monies to local agencies statewide under the COPS program. We got an additional $44,000. Not a lot to offset $300,000 loss, but it's something. So we were able to shift a part of a police officer into this grants fund on an ongoing basis. That it is 25% of a position. Another 1.5 FTEs are being shifted to our asset seizure fund. We periodically get monies through seizure of assets, and once those are adjudicated, we oftentimes will get monies from that, and we have some reserves built up in that fund, and we're proposing to use part of those reserves on a one-time basis to fund part of a police officer and also an office specialist for just next year. In 2014, we're going to have to find monies for that, but it was just an opportunity to use some of those funds next year. And then lastly, in Public Works, this was a shifting of positions to the Downtown Parking Fund and Streets Fund because they were seeing shortfalls in their revenues in the engineering division, so they wanted to offset those revenue shortfalls. Okay, RDA impacts. As you know, the RDA was eliminated on February 1st. The city's acting as a successor agency, which means we're going to be carrying out, the city is carrying out the remaining activities of the former RDA. An oversight board has been convened, has had one meeting, and they will, along with the Department of Finance and State Controller's Office, will be determining which of our costs and projects are considered enforceable obligations. And that's, we've heard a lot about that. But those decisions will affect monies we have on hand, which are about $28 million, including some bond proceeds. It'll also affect what we were expecting to get as future tax increment of about $36 million through 2015. So obviously a lot of money at stake, and we've just started that process. As I mentioned, the RDA staff that were previously in Community Development Department and were reimbursed by the RDA, we basically have had to do something with those staff. We have 2.95 FTEs that have been shifted to a new city housing fund that will really continue in terms of its activity at diminished level, and it will be funded from what are called residual receipts loans, so principal and interest on some loans. They won't be funded any longer from any portion of the tax increment. We shifted 0.75 FTEs to the new successor agency. It's outside of the general fund. We actually eliminated 5 3/4 FTEs. And then we did leave within the general fund parts of an associate planner and parts of a project planner that were in the housing program. They're just being absorbed in other parts of the Community Development Department programs. And then we are overfilling one project planner that was in the part of the RDA, and that'll be just for next year only. And as Mr. Armstrong indicated, we did have some other impacts, overhead and allocated costs that we used to charge to the RDA. Now we're going to have to reabsorb primarily into the general fund. So these are the overall impacts. It's $1.1 million. It includes some loss of attorney charges. The attorney's office used to charge the RDA for the services they provided of $104,000. We can't do that anymore, so that's going to have to be absorbed. There is half of an FTE in the housing staff that's being absorbed, as I mentioned. That's $83,000. I mentioned the overfill of the project planner. That's just for next year only at $150,000. And this was planned anyway, but the RDA was paying the lease cost at the police annex, and so we are going to have to start picking that up. It's $250,000 roughly per year. And then the RDA was paying for some groundwater monitoring of some what are called remediation sites where we have some contaminated soils. We are now going to have to absorb that. Then there's the allocated overhead that used to go to the RDA. We're now going to have to absorb that in the general fund. There was a position reclassification in community development to a business manager that's going to cost $5,400. And then there were some administrative staff that were partly funded by the RDA that we now are going to have to just bring back into the general fund. So I mentioned that we are expecting about $1.5 million in additional property taxes. There's the impacts of the general fund that we're at least projecting for now. So that balance of $387,000 is being added to appropriated reserves. Other potential impacts to the general fund that would come from that reserve I just mentioned, the restorative policing program. We are currently assuming that the RDA will be allowed to continue to pay for that and be defined as an enforceable obligation. We're not sure if that's going to happen, so we believe that the 387 appropriate reserve will likely have to be used to fund the restorative policing program for next year and on an ongoing basis. The funding provided to the MTD, it's $300,000 for the downtown shuttle program. That was a mitigation that we provided as part of the Paseo Nuevo Mall. We may have to just tell MTD we can't pay that. That's a decision we have to make, but that's money that currently we're anticipating will not come from the RDA. That would either have to come from the general fund or just not provide those monies. And I'm sorry, it's from the streets fund. That's where it comes from. And then the RDA was expected to pay for remediation of some what are called leaking underground fuel tank sites. We're expecting they would be able to come up with $250,000 in the next few years for those efforts. So at this point, it may come down to the general fund to fund those projects. And then lastly, we are currently providing Paseo Nuevo, paying for what are called property management costs. It's like trash services and the like. And the RDA had a commitment for that. And so if it's determined it's not an enforceable obligation, the general fund would likely have to pay for that. Our balancing proposal, pretty straightforward. The deficit of 879, the structural deficit. I mentioned the last item here, the reserves in the capital fund. Those are savings that we have in our capital fund from just accumulated over the last few years. And as Mr. Armstrong indicated, we have a new accounting manager, and one of the things she did was just started looking carefully at all of our funds, and I think doing a really good job scouring, as Mr. Armstrong indicated, all funds, and was able to identify that we do have accumulated savings and projects that just came under budget in our capital fund that was originally funded from our general fund. That's the 364. And then some of you will recall that we've had a number of federal declared disasters over the last 15 years. Two of them were storm-related in 98 and 2005. And those funds have now been closed out. They've been audited, and so there's no more activity in those. And it turns out we actually have some residual funds in those two disaster funds, totaling $332,000. And we're now taking those monies and using them for next year to balance our budget. And then the middle item, liability rebate program, this is not related to workers' comp. It's part of the same insurance program fund, self-insurance fund, but it's on the liability side, not workers' comp side. And we are part of a joint powers authority called Excel, and they manage all of our liability insurance programs. And every 5 years or so, we have opportunities to get rebates based on what actually transpires. And so we are drawing down some monies from that program and using $183,000 to close out the remaining deficit in our general fund. As Mr. Armstrong indicated, the long-term challenges, we've talked a lot about this, pension costs. The 2013 costs overall are lower than what we planned, but still higher than 2012. And as I mentioned before, at our work session, PERS board did approve a lowering of their rate of return on their investments assumption from 7.75% to 7.5%, which means for the next few years, we're going to see an immediate impact of about 1 to 3% in our rates starting in 2014. We've talked about the fact that all of our retirement plans are well underfunded. So if you just think about what it takes to fund our normal costs, which is just the normal thing we would have to spend every year, ignoring unfunded liabilities, plus having to amortize those deep unfunded liabilities, we're going to likely see continued high rates in the next, at least in the foreseeable future. Obviously, to the extent that PERS generates returns in excess of 7.5%, that will help, but it would have to be substantial and sustained for it to have a material impact on our rates in the next 5 years, for example. And then the second item is the infrastructure financing. I was looking at some of our old financial statements, and we currently have about almost $400 million in assets, just the carrying value. That's the book value. That's not even the replacement value, which is far more. But that's under the responsibility of the general fund or the governmental operations. We are fortunate that we have funding for streets from our Measure A, which is a half-cent sales tax that was approved by the voters in 2010, extended Measure D. We get gas tax revenues. We also have UUT revenues, and then federal and state grants for streets. We also have a program for facilities maintenance. It's about a $5 million program, which not only includes the general fund facilities, but some work done for enterprise funds. And that's just paid for by all the general fund departments for maintaining this building, the building on Garden Street, libraries and the like. So we spend a fair amount of money each year. or at least for the maintenance. But we don't have a dedicated funding source for the replacement or major improvements to our infrastructure, like the police building. We don't have money that we have dedicated or accumulated to do those kinds of projects. And we've been relying on the RDA, obviously, for those kind of projects, whether it be the fire station or a real rec center. Those have been RDA funded. Without the RDA, those kind of projects are a lot more difficult to fund. And clearly, with the premature elimination of the RDA, we are facing, a bigger challenge, or at least a more immediate challenge in how we finance these projects on a long-term basis. Real quick, in the enterprise funds, I just wanted to point out a few things. One, you can see that what's interesting is that in total, their recommended budget of $100 million is actually less than the general fund. It's about $100.4 million. You can see some changes in individual enterprise funds. I wanted to just speak to a couple. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. A couple. First, the wastewater fund. You can see there's been an increase of $715,000. One of the big increases relates to the replacement of what are called Vector trucks. They use this piece of equipment to clean out storm or sewer systems, just part of the sewer system. And those trucks have been on a 15-year replacement cycle, but have been determined to be very unreliable, require a lot of maintenance, and they're just always down from being available for service. So they've increased or shortened the replacement cycle from 15 years to 5 years, which means that they're having to come up with another $267,000 per year toward the vehicle replacement fund to make sure that they have these things replaced over 5 years. So that's a big impact to them. And then just other minor increases in that fund are accounting for the increase. And then outside of this is not part of the operations, but Mr. Armstrong reminded me of the fact that in their capital program, we are having to spend an additional $900,000 per year for the next 5 years to fund additional work for our pipeline replacement in the wastewater fund. And we'll be talking about that when they come, but this is going to require a supplemental increase to rates to cover that additional $900,000 per year. This is in addition to what they do every year. So that's part of their capital budget, not reflected in this change here. In the water fund, big reduction of $1.3 million. About half of that reduction relates to lowering their budget for next year for chemical and landscaping supplies. They have looked, it's been a volatile number, but they've decided, well, let's just look what it's been like over the last 5 years and sort of take an average, and they were able to lower that. It's a little risky, but they believe that it's more in line with at least the last 5 years average. So they've lowered that, and then they've also reduced other costs. And what they've been trying to do is they recognize they have large capital projects coming up in the next few years, and they're trying to sort of reduce their operating budget and generate more reserves for these larger projects. So that's part of what they've done for next year. And I did want to point out one more thing on the municipal golf course. You see a $300,000 reduction. They've obviously been looking for ways to cut costs in light of the revenue declines and rounds going down. Things have stabilized there. But what they've done is they have 2 positions that are vacant that they've eliminated, and they are backfilling those with hourly staff, and that's generating about $170,000 in cost savings. So that's a big portion of that reduction. Everything else is just trying to trim their budgets to help balance their budget.
Did you say the golf has stabilized?
The golf fund, at least the last few months, their rounds have stabilized. I wouldn't say they're out of the woods, but we were seeing a continued decline in rounds. But I think the good weather this winter has really helped them, so their rounds have seemed to have stabilized and are doing a little bit better.
Thank you.
Well, that's really it. I'm just going to go quickly through the budget review schedule. Next Monday, we have our first official work session. All of these are not going to be on a Tuesday, so we have special budget work sessions. The first will be with all the administrative departments. That'll be Monday at 1:30. It'll be here in this room. And I won't go through all these, but you can see we have a number of meetings that are scheduled for various departments to present their budgets. All of this schedule, everything, the budget document, the review schedule, all this is online now. As of now, we put everything on our website so people can look at the document, look at the review schedule, and even all our proposed fees changes are available now online. And there's the website if people wanted to go to it. We also will at request make CD-ROMs for people who want to take sort of a, have some version of a hard copy but don't want to look online. We try to avoid printing these documents because they're kind of expensive. And then we also have hard copies at the Main and East Side branches reference desks. And I just want to also thank, this is a big effort. Thank all the departments. There are a lot of people involved. This document is not very big, but the work that goes into putting all these numbers together is pretty extensive, and every department is impacted, and everybody works hard. I wanted to thank the people in the City Administrator's Office, Nina Johnson and Lori Peterson and Christy Schmidt, and of course, particular thanks to Michael Pease, who's sitting here. I asked him to be here because I wanted to embarrass him. He's really our budget quarterback, and he's done an amazing job the last 3-4 years since he's been here. And he's just a great worker and a great asset to the city and our department. His assistant Jonathan Abad helps him as well. It's a two-man show essentially running the whole process. Jill Tara, our treasury manager, helping with the revenues, of course. A new member, Ruby Carrillo, was a big help to me in reviewing budget documents or budget submittals. Diego Martin, our new analyst, working under Jill, and of course Jenny Hopwood, who helps with the budget document preparation. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
And thank you for your patience.
Do we have any speaker slips on this? No. Okay, so any questions from council? Mr. House.
Thanks for the report, and I know we're all sighing some kind of collective sigh of relief here. It's definitely a great shift. A couple questions. One on the redevelopment agency. The 20% of the tax increment from redevelopment during its life was set aside for affordable housing, and it went to the primarily to the housing authority. What's the status on that kind of funding, and is there a way to continue that, or what are they going to do? That's a big question there, but help me.
Sure, Madam Mayor, Councilmember House, that's really an undecided issue. We currently have in our housing fund about $5 million or $4 million, and we're expecting, so about $4 million we have currently. Those funds are in question as to whether we have to resend those to the county as part of this allocation, or whether we can keep those. So that would be part of any legislation to clarify that point. We will continue to do some housing work because we still have to sort of monitor those affordable housing covenants and the like. And so we still will have some staff dedicated to that effort. And those staff, as indicated earlier, will be funded not from any tax increment monies or any allocations from the county, but from what are called payments on residual receipt loans for these various projects that we've been involved with, whether it be through the Housing Authority and the like, where there is at times repayment of those loans. Oftentimes they get converted to grants, but we've been seeing about $400,000, almost $500,000 in repayments on those loans, and that's what's currently funding the remainder of what's left in our housing activity until it's decided what happens with the $5 million or $4 million we have in the bank. We won't get any more tax increment of the 20% set aside for housing that we know.
The question goes a little further than that, is that, the tax is still being collected.
It is.
Where's it going? Why can't we direct it to housing?
The tax increment that was going to the RDA, it was about $20 million. We are going to be able to retain a portion of that for what is considered enforceable obligations. An obvious one is debt service. So we know we're going to get that money. Whatever is left over from the $20 million is, if we don't get it, it'll be spread out to all the taxing agencies that are within the project area, the schools, the county, and the city. And that's why I said we're going to get about $1.5 million. So almost to the extent those funds are not determined to be tied to an enforceable obligation, it'll just be spread back to all the taxing agencies within the project
Effectively
area.
ending that affordable housing program
Exactly.
that has provided such a great benefit all these years.
Exactly.
A moment of silence, I think, is on the water fund. There was a reduction of almost $1.5 million, and the way you presented it almost sounded like it was a shift from operating to capital or to reserves or something. Am I misunderstanding that? But or would you?
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is that they recognize that they have some capital needs, large capital needs in the next several years, and to the extent they can spend less of their budget, those savings would fall to the bottom line and would become part of the reserve balances. And so for next year, were able to identify areas where they can reduce their costs. And one of those areas was in, as I mentioned, chemical supplies and landscaping supplies. They looked at the last 5 years, and again, it's a volatile number, but they determined that using a 5-year average, for example, would be a better reflection of what's likely going to happen next year. And by doing so, they were able to lower their budgeted amounts from what they originally had by $700,000. So that's going to free up some money. And again, that would ultimately fall to the bottom line. So it just helps capital indirectly.
And I might add, if you may recall, when the Zaka fire hit, we had a huge uptick in the need for chemicals at the Cater treatment plant because of the additional sediment and stuff that was in the water we got from both Gibraltar and Kachuma. And now we're starting to see the water quality improve, and so the use of those chemicals is going down.
Right.
And so that's benefiting us a lot. And then there's also just a little less water usage than we had anticipated. So the revenues go down a little bit, but also the expenses on the other side go down because we're not processing as much water and also paying for water.
Okay, and then the last thing I have, and I appreciate, thank you, that helps me understand that. And then the last piece is of the entire thing, probably this one of the smallest items on the entire thing, and I know we're going to get into each of the departments and listen to them, and then we'll give our feedback. But I appreciate $40,000 for rental housing mediation task force, but with all that's going on, it's kind of surprised me that you didn't bring it back up to full funding right away, right out of the chute, because that's one of those essential services that just can't go away. And I think it's important that we. I'm just putting that out there for the rest of my colleagues here as well, because that's a really important one for me. And I'm curious as to why we just held it at 40 right now, or what's your plan?
And I do want to address that because, until a couple of years ago, no general fund money at all went towards rental housing mediation task force, none. And last year, your council, on a one-time basis, put general fund money in to support the program. So actually, we felt it was a big deal to, on an ongoing basis, put $40,000 into it. So, and that's not all the total budget for rental housing mediation. That's just the general fund. There's also still CDBG money going in. So the overall program's still well over $100,000. But we didn't feel that it was appropriate for us to fully fund it and add another $40,000 or $50,000, going up to $100,000 a year of general fund support or so to rental housing mediation.
I appreciate that context. You're right. We had a significant contribution from other agencies, which has really fallen away. And perhaps by hook or by crook, we should find some way to get it back up there in coordination or whatever. Certainly, I'm going to be really alert to that as we get along. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Mr. Rouse?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So with the RDA sunset, which of course we were anticipating in 3 years in any case, I know that we used a fair amount of it for some of our aging infrastructures, parking structures and whatnot. And going forward, we still have a lot of aging infrastructure. So what different type of budget mechanism are we going to need to reestablish or to establish, I guess, some kind of a capital fund going forward that can address some of these problems? Or is that something that's going to be able to be budgeted in the general fund issue, or are we going to have to look at it as some kind of a future tax mechanism? What can you address how the RDA and that would relate to each other in this near term?
Let me take a shot. I mean, the reality of it is there's two ways to fund it. We either have to raise revenues, or we're going to have to cut someplace within the general fund in order to free up money that you can use towards that infrastructure. And it's, not just the loss of the RDA, but even before the RDA went away, we still had that challenge. That's what the infrastructure financing, report was from 4 years ago. It says that we still have an ongoing gap on our general fund facilities where we're just not producing enough money. So, it's either a new revenue source or look at general fund priorities and say, where do we cut? And I think the challenge is, if you look at, Parks and Rec, we've made major cuts there, community development. We've made some cuts in police, not a lot in fire, but we've pretty much done most of the cutting we can do. So really, I think we have to look at the revenue side, and then in most cases, that probably means a vote of the people.
Mr. White?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to return to the impacts on RDA elimination, the item specifically the $300,000 provided to the MTD. I didn't get what you said about that. You mentioned it, but I didn't understand exactly what was being said there.
Mr. Casey?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember White, the redevelopment agency has been paying essentially a mitigation fee on the development of Paseo Nuevo to offset its traffic impacts as a payment to MTD to run the downtown waterfront shuttle services. And so that was going to continue through the life of the redevelopment agency. So we were going to continue to pay that until 2015. The difficulty we have now is that with the elimination of the RDA, do we have the enforceable obligation to have the redevelopment agency funds through the oversight board to continue to pay that fee, or is that not going to be approved, and therefore the obligation either falls to the streets and transportation funds, or we don't make that payment to MTD to continue that support?
So that is an issue that will be reviewed by the oversight committee.
Correct.
That's why that was raised.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you. And then, okay, we'll get into then later the issue of what was going to happen in 2015. So but that conversation will occur when we get around to that piece of the budget.
And I think I'll be honest, I don't think we had thought about what was going to happen in 2015 quite yet. So that thought process just got accelerated 3 years early. And so now we're having that discussion.
On that same note, the restorative policing program, you explained that there's an appropriated reserve. Do you sense there's a timeline with the oversight committee where there's going to be a determination of whether we think it is an obligated contract and whether or not we'll be able to keep that money or not?
Madam Mayor and council members, we prepared for the oversight board 4 binders full of projects that the oversight board needs to work through project by project. There's about 40 projects in there. You've seen them on our ROPS schedules. And so we're going to work through that item by item. We're going to start on binder 1 at the next meeting on May 1st. So I could see this taking 2 to 3 months of kind of decision-making time before we kind of get a definitive answer about what is going to be funded and what's not. And then that puts that question back to us as a city council to determine.
So then on a practical measure, come July 1st, if there's no determination yet on what happens with those funds, we're still moving forward with, do we, as part of the budget, need to figure out to temporarily use the appropriated reserves so that way we don't end the program July 1st, and then if we do keep the RDA money, we can reimburse ourselves? Is that something we're going to have to figure out during the budget process?
Madam Mayor and council members, I don't think so. I think it would be our intent not to stop that program mid-cycle while we're going through that decision-making process. And that just means the city is going to be on the hook for those costs that we continue to expend if the oversight board does not approve the money.
But that needs to be decided by this body to use that appropriated reserve for the restorative policing program in the case that we do not get the RDA funding.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so that part needs to be decided upon. That's still a policy question.
Yes.
And I'll just add, and I saw no lights, and now I see lights, but I'll just finish my comments here and go back to council. Certainly, if you compare the city's budget presentation, initial budget presentation, to other public agencies, we're looking pretty good. We're not looking at major layoffs. We're not looking at concessions. But I want to remind all of us that it still includes main library closed on Mondays. It still includes the significant cutbacks in park maintenance, all the different programs in Parks and Recreation, and across the board. So if we had an interest in doing something to effect of enhancing those, I think we'll have to figure out where does that money come from. And you've presented us with a balanced budget of a status quo situation, same type of service impacts from before into the future for another year. The positive side is we're not looking at furloughs and we're not looking at concessions. We don't have to go through that process this year. So that'd be a fair assessment, I guess, Mr. Armstrong.
That's very accurate.
Okay. And then finally, the capital program, I think the number was about 600 and something thousand. Can you remind me, I think it was about 1 or 2%. What did the Infrastructure Financing Task Force come up with as a recommendation, as a goal? What, in terms of general fund capital expenditures?
Madam Mayor, I'm not sure if they specified a dollar amount, but I think they sort of recommended that we sweep about 10% of the general fund revenues into a capital sinking fund. If I recall correctly, that's what they were suggesting, in addition to whatever we would fund annually just for typical capital, whether it be 600,000 or 800,000. So I think their recommendation was 10% sweep for major infrastructure projects.
And is that being part of the Finance Committee's conversation about reserve policies? Because they're talking about a fund, right? So that would be a reserve fund.
It is part of that conversation.
Okay. Okay, but certainly 600,000 or whatever is not even close to 1% of the general fund used for capital.
By
And then
0.5%.
we've just lost RDA for other capital. Okay. So again, good news in big picture, short term, but I think we still have some challenges ahead of us. Mr. White, you want to continue your
Thank you.
questions?
Yeah, just one smaller question. The disaster funds that were mentioned as we are balancing a scenario, is that money that was, it was provided to the city as disaster relief money, but wasn't spent, yet we got through whatever disaster that was, and then we don't have to return it. It just, could you
Sure, Madam Mayor.
elaborate on that a little
Sure,
bit?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember White. So these were disasters of, one of them was 1998, I believe, the other one was 2005. And whenever we have a disaster that's declared a federal disaster, we get funding from both FEMA and CalEMA, and we get portions of reimbursements, so not all of our costs are reimbursed. But in the grand scheme of things, once all the ins and outs were sort of resolved, I'm surprised. I don't know how that happened, but I know they've closed out those funds and they've completed their audits. We wound up in one of the funds having one of them had about 125,000. The other one had 15 or so thousand. Surprising to find that kind of residual in there. But they are closed out, and those are monies that essentially, if you think about it, we were over reimbursed by either FEMA or CalEMA with respect to what we incurred in costs. Maybe we didn't charge all those costs to that fund. Maybe we missed that. Maybe that's what caused overage. But in the end, we have those monies available to us.
And I want to make sure it's clear, we're not making a profit off of these things, but typically what happens when you have a disaster is you create a special fund and you charge all your direct costs to that special fund and you go negative, and then you may get advances from the federal government, and then oftentimes it's 5, 6, 7 years before they come back and audit. But we also will charge them levels of overhead and things like that don't get charged directly to that fund, but they may be an allowable cost. And when they reimburse us, we put all that money back into the fund, and then when the whole project's done and all the books are closed, this is what was left. And so that's why it takes a while, and in all likelihood, we were covered for costs like the cost of vehicle or equipment and things like that may have been charged in another fund, but when we got the reimbursement from the federal government, we put it all back into that special fund that we had.
Mr. Hotchkiss?
Just a quick analytical question on the general fund key tax revenues. TOT is recovered, but sales tax hasn't. Just as a layman, I would almost think that those two would be parallel. Where's the discrepancy? Is there a way to know that?
Sure. Maybe I can go back. But the easy answer is that we were seeing, I probably won't be able to get back to it quick enough, but we were seeing a recovery in our bed tax revenues sooner than we did for sales taxes. I think we were seeing really almost about midway of fiscal year 2011, we started to see bed taxes, growing at 5, 6, 7%. It wasn't until just more recently, the last 3 quarters or 4 quarters, that we've seen sales tax grow. So I think they just got a jump start. You're right. Do you typically expect them to run in tandem? That's what we've seen typically, but I think the tourism industry has recovered more quickly than potentially the retail business.
And are those both reported monthly? TOT is,
the
I
bed
think.
taxes are reported to us monthly. Sales taxes are collected by the State Board of Equalization on a monthly basis, but they are essentially provided to us on a quarterly basis. We get monthly advances, but they're not trued up. They're trued up every quarter, and they're 3 months behind.
So that could explain some of the lag here, actually.
It could. It could.
Mr. Armstrong has something.
I wanted to also, on a macro kind of, tax scale, what's happening not just in our city but in the state and nationally is the patterns of retail shopping have changed. The big box stores have a much larger portion. Internet sales that are not taxed are an increasingly large part. So this also is a reflection of what's happening in retail sales generally. It's a narrower base that's being taxed. And if you look at state receipts, this trend of not keeping up with the economy has been going on. And so I think that's part of why I don't think we expect that we will see retail sales grow like bed taxes, because just people's shopping patterns have changed pretty dramatically. Just look at the retail stores that are closing nationally. People even are buying cars in different ways now, and so that's affecting retail sales as well.
Good explanation. Thank you.
Ms. Murillo?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm glad Ms. McGill stayed for the discussion about the shuttle buses. The MTD board did discuss it today. I don't think they came up with a solution, but those shuttle buses are awfully popular, and I'm hoping we can find a way to fund them, maybe charging more for the fare. But I will follow up on that, Ms. McGill. I also would like to express my support for the Rental Housing Mediation Task Force function. And then finally, I'd just like to say I feel like I got elected into an easy time with good budget times, and to acknowledge my colleagues who were here when things were really tough. And I admire you, and selfishly glad I'm didn't have to make those terribly tough decisions. So I'm ready to make some, but just acknowledging that, and thank goodness we're in the place we are. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. House?
And just one more footnote, and maybe to follow a little bit on the spirit of what Ms. Murillo was just talking about, and that is in the staff report, I underlined this. It said, for the first time in several years, and you reported this, the city will not be relying on wage and benefit concessions from city employees, such as unpaid furloughs, to balance the general fund budget. And it concludes, without the cooperation of city employees, much deeper cuts to the organization would have been required over the last several years. And I don't know that the public at large is as aware as we might be, who are here in this room today, how significant that those employees stepping up as they did really has been to helping us get through this. And Mr. Samari, could you just take a moment and look back with us? And we were really in a terrible spot. We still have a long way. We're not out of the ditch. We got a lot of services we haven't restored, and we haven't begun to really replenish the reserves the way we'd like to, and we have a sinking fund we haven't fully established. So we've got a long way to go. But to get to this point really did. I'm getting it, that it really required something from the employees.
And Madam Mayor, Councilmember House, I would agree. I mean, we were relying heavily on concessions from all groups. I think we were getting somewhere around $2.5 million per year over the last 3 years. I remember facing at one point a $10 million deficit, a projected deficit. We've come a long way. But yeah, clearly those concessions were an important part of being able to manage through this time without having to make further cuts to the organization, even though we made a lot of cuts, but it would have been even more decimating.
Yeah, and in some cases they even stepped up ahead of when their contracts would have been need to be renewed and participated voluntarily, or as well as they could. But thanks to everyone who is in our employ and part of the city government, running and taking care of all these services that we really have come to depend on, and it's essential for their stepping up and participating like they did.
Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. To sort of follow on that a little bit, I'd appreciate hearing when we get to the specific departments about what that loss of furlough, the elimination of the furlough, what that translates into in terms of, for example, additional work product or work hours, or for obviously particularly for Parks and Rec and Library or two that really come to mind. So if we could get a little bit of specific information on that, that would be great.
Okay, I think we need to approve the schedule. So if there's a motion for that.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you very much, and we'll continue on next Monday. Okay, we're moving on to item number 7.
Item number 7, Police Department update.
Thank you. Chief Sanchez.
Excuse me, Madam Mayor, I'm handing out some of the slides, and I've added some slides on some gang issues that's good news that I did not get to put on a slide that we just put together a couple hours ago that I think would interest someone to put that in front of you, and I'll get to that in a minute. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you the department update and what we're doing and what we're about to do in the future. Before we get to the slides, I wanted to share with you that I know you're all aware of the attempt murder of Friday the 13th. We have made the arrest of 3 suspects in that attempt murder. The victim is still at Cottage in extremely critical condition. We've already notified his family, and they're by his side, and we're waiting to see how that turns out. But it is very, very critical, so we want to keep them in our thoughts today. We did make the arrests. The detectives, the SWAT team, were able to find a variety of items of evidence in Goleta and in our city. We had a lot of cooperation by a lot of witnesses at that party that night that helped identify some of the suspects, and then the hunt was on, and we were able to capture all of them. That is the latest in terms of high-profile crimes. We're going to go ahead and go to the slides. And the reason I gave you a copy of it is so none of us strain to that slide. But I will share with you that these are just Part 1 crimes over the last several months. Violent crime is lower than it was a year ago, and that's good news. We're not going to go over every number, and that's why I gave it to you. If you have questions, obviously today and after today, you can call me directly. Over to the right are property crimes. That continues to draw a lot of our attention and take up a lot of our resources in terms of burglary from motor vehicle, especially residential burglaries and business burglaries continue to take a lot of our time in patrol and in investigation. So property crime is up, but violent crime is down. If you look at that just as an example on the violent crime, this time last year, if you look at just in every month, it's lower this year than last, and it's higher on the property crime side comparing last year to this year. We won't go over every line. On the next slide, I wanted to give you a quick synopsis of how we look in comparison to other cities in the Tri-County area in terms of Part 1 crime. And it's in front of you and on the screen, and it talks about violent crime at the top. If you look at the bottom, the city of San Luis Obispo is the lowest of the 4 cities that we're 3 other cities that we compare to. Again, violent crime, Santa Maria is there in March at about 28, 29. I'm sorry, that's, and then we're at the top. Let me start again. SLO is at the bottom. We see Santa Barbara PD as second lowest with the amount of crime, violent crime, in the last several months since October of 11. Oxnard is a little higher, and Santa Maria, with a lot of the issues that they're having, are clearly having quite the time with their violent crime, their gang crime, their murders and attempt murders and rapes and other felonies. They're having one heck of a time, and they are very down in strength in terms of patrol and detectives. So they've really, they're in trouble over there. In terms of property crime, since October 11th to March 12th of this year, again, we are where we are. It's really taking a lot of resources and a lot of our time. We're near the top, getting close to the Oxnard issue in terms of property crime. We've made several arrests of crews of burglars, but they continue to just beat us to the punch, if you will. We've made a lot of juvenile arrests, a lot of gang arrests that we'll talk about in a little bit in terms of property crime, but it just continues to happen. especially the crime of burglary for motor vehicle continues to be a crime of opportunity. When people are leaving either their cars unlocked or something in sight, that becomes a crime of opportunity, and things are taken, which lead to credit cards being used, et cetera, et cetera. So that is still sort of knocking us around a little bit. Our detectives continue to work hard. They're working a lot of cases, and we're sort of chasing the tail there on the burglary issue, on the property crime. Again, the good news is that violent crime, especially gang crime, is extremely low, and we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. From the Investigative Bureau, if you remember, about 2 years ago, right in front of, in the daytime, I believe, also in front of Harding School, we had that attempt murder, where a gentleman was shot in the head. He survived it. The community there on the west side was extremely upset about this crime occurring. Obviously, we all were. The detectives did a wonderful job, and without going into too much detail, we eventually found our suspects in Nevada, and they pulled over to have something to eat, and we pulled up behind them in Nevada, and they were surprised to see a Santa Barbara badge staring them in the face. So we made some arrests on that of about 4 individuals, and Mike Clater was the key to that, along with the U.S. Marshals and the FBI that we use from time to time when we believe suspects have fled our state. Most recently, the kiosk robberies that really created a lot of havoc and a lot of fear in a lot of our employees, especially our young people that are employed there. We were able to make the arrest of Paul Gradius and was charged with the robberies. He also was charged with the bank robbery that he admitted to that we were investigating as well, and the FBI is handling that. And that happened at B of A on Lower State Street. Before we get to the hiring update, if you look at the gang tagging activity, I'd like to go through that first, and then we'll get to the hiring aspect. Gang crime is down quite a bit, which is great news. It still continues to happen. This chart shows what those 3 headings at the bottom show. So we just get to the numbers on the bottom. You can compare month to month at your leisure. But just in the last 3 months, if you look at gang-related activity, well, let's go to tagging. In 2011, we had quite a number of events of tagging. Many people would say, is that just gang tagging? The answer is no. Most of our tagging was not gang-related at all. There were other individuals who were out destroying property, causing us a lot of grief and causing a lot of pain to the businesses. And if you notice, in 2011, it was quite high. It went down quite a bit in 2012. And the reason is that we were able, our YSS detectives were able to arrest several individuals who were really the culprits of most of the issues. And that's why it went down. When we talk about gang-related and gang incident, the difference is this. If it's gang-related, that could be a theft, let's say at a store, and a gang member is the thief. Gang incident is when it's a gang member against another gang member, or a crime that benefits a gang. So those are the 2 differences. And if you notice, if we look at gang-related, in 2011, we were very high. And now, if you look at March and April of 2012 in gang-related, the number there, yes, that is a 0. Gang incident, the one below, again, that is the one where we have gang members committing crimes that benefit the gang, or a gang member committing a crime against another gang member. Look at 2011. In January, we had 39 gang incidents, gang on gang. In 2012, in January, we had 6. That's quite a drop. I'll get to the reasons in a second. In February, we had 25. In 2011, only 8 gang incidents in February of 8. Now, it did go up this last month in March. We had 20 in 2011 up in March, and we had 24 in March this year. The reason for the drop in those drop numbers is because we made many arrests along with probation and parole at that time. Some of these folks have since been released, and they recommitted. We're up to 24. Again, kind of chasing our tail a little bit and getting recommitters again, if you will. So the recidivism is working pretty good, but it's not totally eradicated. So in March of this year, we were at 24. And we'll take questions at the end. And let's talk about our hiring process. We're doing pretty well. I think we're doing pretty outstanding, and a lot of it has to do with the direction of Mr. Armstrong and all of you and several council members before you, as well as those that are here today, of overhiring and getting the job done in terms of getting people hired in a variety of areas, especially on the patrol side, and I'll share some pretty outstanding statistics in a second about that. Self-explanatory. You can read it at your leisure. The one that I mentioned earlier that we're working on next week and the following week is the interviewing of the business manager candidates, and we're hoping that by the middle of next month we will have that person on board, and we're looking very much forward to that. Before we go to the next slide, I wanted to share something with you. You know, recently we had an entry-level test for police officer based on the fact that I've been directed to overhire and anticipate vacancies. We anticipate probably between 3 and 4 retirements of police officers by the end of the calendar year this year. But I want to share some numbers with you. I didn't put it on the screen, but you can either write this down, you won't forget these big numbers. Again, we recently received 2,580 applications to become a police officer in the city of Santa Barbara. 747 of those actually were scheduled to take the written exam, and that was last week. In actuality, we had 472 people show up for possibly 3 to 4 positions. So people still want to work here. 302 of those 472 actually passed, and on Saturday we had 271 who participated in the physical agility, which is the next process, and we currently have a list of 260 people who we're interviewing this week and next week, every day of the week. So I thank you for giving me that authority to overhire, and we're very busy. I really want to thank Marcelo and his staff and all the HR staff. They do a tremendous job of the testing process. But can you imagine that we're only looking at 3 or 4 vacancies, and we're going to look at 260 people? That's pretty awesome statistic. People want to work here. Let's talk about restorative policing, the next slide. I want to share a couple of our friends here. You have them in front of you and on the screen. This gentleman lived on the streets of Santa Barbara since 1999. Since 1999 to the most recent time, he had 129 arrests and citations for alcohol-related offenses. He's now living at the Falding Hotel in services. This was part of what the restorative policing group does, including those individuals that are not sworn officers. And this gentleman approached me the other day, and he's extremely grateful, and he's working through his journey. The next gentleman there, really interesting guy. Since 2005 in the streets of Santa Barbara, he alone was arrested 54 times. We got him into a treatment center in Los Angeles, and he is no longer living on the streets. That is the same person. We wanted to just share that and a little bit of our camp cleanup. I sent some photos to you recently of the camp cleanups, the before and the after. This continues to be an issue. We continue to work with the County Mental Health, the Mental Health Association, the CHP on the on-ramps with Caltrans and with the Sheriff's Department on our camp cleanups. So we're not doing this alone, but a lot of our work is being done by our beat coordinators that we enhanced this year by 3. Our in-car video research update, part of the budget that was before you today includes the in-car video in combination with some asset forfeiture, and we're looking very much forward to deciding in the next month or two, hopefully sooner, which vendor we are going to go with. But I wanted to thank you for that. And again, it's in your budget before you with a combination of asset forfeiture funds for the purchase of those items. I wanted to share some other things, if I might. Over the last few years, we've had meetings with Pueblo. The mayor and I have had some very interesting conversations with Pueblo over the months. We've begun a great collaboration with Pueblo, and I conducted a meeting with them several months ago at Franklin School. We had over 100 folks show up, several of them officers. We had a wonderful discussion on towed vehicles, driver's license, crime, gangs, the whole gamut. The meeting went fantastically well, and we decided to get together again on June 7th, and I suggested that not to just have the chief of police there, but to allow me to bring as many police officers to this meeting as possible, specifically those that are assigned the east side. They thought it was a great idea. They asked me if I had any other requests, and I said, yes, have food, and a lot of them will show up. So we're going to have a potluck. So we're going to take meals. They're going to take meals. It's just one of those down and dirty, grassroots level approaches at enhancing our communication and our partnership with the East Side. And we're going to be at Franklin School on June 7th at 6 p.m. If you want to come by, we're going to conduct a meeting with them. But the majority of the time is going to have my officers in uniform meeting, sitting, eating, talking, and getting to know the community better that they patrol. And we're really excited about that. They agreed to do that, and we're looking very much forward to that. On the Police Activities League side, on April 27th of this year, most of you know, Putting Kids First is our fundraiser for PAL. If you have not purchased your tickets, just call the PAL office, and we'll get you some tickets. Some of the things that PAL has been doing recently, we did a conference in Anaheim. We attended a conference in Anaheim with a lot of our youth leadership. And our high school youth came back and actually designed a program for junior hires over this last spring break and mentored families and young people, 4th and 6th graders, the entire spring break in terms of making some better decisions in their life and being careful with some of the decisions they're thinking about making. So I thought that was really great. Our after-school programs continue, and as you know, PAL pays for all the uniforms, for the referees, for the facilities, and it continues to serve 250 students a week in our city. 250 young people a week are being served either in sports programs, mentoring programs, tutoring programs, and alike. Lately, this last week, I made some promotions. I made 2 more promotions today. As you know, Captain Armando Martel is retiring this month. On May 18th, is his last day. And I've promoted Dave Whittam from lieutenant to captain, and he will be going and working the patrol division. This morning, I promoted Officer Andy Feller from officer to sergeant, and I promoted Sergeant Bill Marazita, who all of you know, to lieutenant. And the 3 of them will be pinned with their badges on May 18th at 1 o'clock. So please be there and with us for that. And we really appreciate that. A couple of quick things. We're getting involved with the Santa Barbara Children's Museum as a police department, and we're also getting involved with the Dream Foundation in the city. Some of my officers are delivering flowers to the terminally ill. Some of these folks actually have wishes to meet a police officer. These people are terminally ill. They have less than a year. And they're asking to meet SWAT team members, canines, maybe attend a training. And I've become very involved with them, and my officers have just jumped at the opportunity to serve that community, and we just feel honored to do that. Lastly, over the years, I've talked a lot about recruiting our own community members to become police officers in our community, to come up with a process to do that. We need to do that. Other communities do it. And we have a lot of great people in this city who are growing up, doing great things, who I believe we need to mentor and to sort of have a minor league team, if you will. Just this week in the testing, we had people from all over the country here. And I believe that we need to give more opportunities to our local folks to get hired within the city that they grew up in. I think that's a great goal to do. So what I proposed is several trips to Los Angeles, my old hunting grounds there, as Jim tells me, to look at a program that's called Police Magnet Program. I shared this with a couple of council people recently in passing. We will be meeting with the school district, with the police officers on LAPD who do this. And what it is a high school program, magnet program, at specific high schools that have a curriculum added to the students' busy day of law enforcement and fire services and public service in their community. These are courses that they get credit for. If they are seniors, and they graduate in good standing from that magnet program along with the 3.0 and take classes there, they come out with half of an AS degree in public safety. This is working well in the city of Los Angeles. I personally don't know anybody there anymore. They're all retired, and I'm still working. And so I don't know anyone there, but my BCs know everyone there, believe it or not, in that process, and we've connected with them. So we're going to be visiting several schools, several high schools, to see how that police department did it, what it took, and how it's going. We're going to bring back statistics. This program has been there for about 9 or 10 years, and we want to come back and see, in reality, what was the success? How many people got into public service in their own community? I believe it's a good idea, and I decided to do that this year before the end of the school year to look at this program and continually bring you back updates about that because I believe it's very, very important. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you. I don't see any speaker slips. No. So we'll just go one. Ms. Murillo, you can start.
Thank you so much. Chief, you have my full support on your last item there.
Thank you.
And I so look forward to helping you go into the community and identify young people who would like to stay in their hometown and work for their community and have a good job. That is very, very exciting. In terms of the potluck, I have the best tamalera, Josie Torres, and if she's watching right now, we're going to order some tamales for the potluck, the Pueblo event.
Thank you.
And I look forward to celebrating with our officers. Some of them are back there in the chambers here. And I'd also like to ask, Madam Mayor, if we can photocopy. There's several members of the news media out there. The statistics on gang and tagging activity, because I don't think it's in the packets. This would be great for you all to have as you go and write your stories about today's update. And then finally, I'd like to say that I would hope more members of the public would come to these updates with the chief. There's a group out there right now trying to change our charter and trying to create accountability and transparency in the police department as it relates to the community. And this is the venue, right here, right now, to express your concerns. If people are intimidated, my office is certainly open. My phone lines are open. Let me know what concerns you have about our police chief, our police department. That's a role I play, and again, my door is open, and I encourage people to use this venue to have their voices heard. Thank you,
Mr. Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Chief, on page 3 on that Tri-County crime comparison, the Part 1 crimes, are those just the raw numbers, or is that adjusted in any way for the different populations in the different cities?
The raw numbers.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So if they were adjusted, these lines would be a lot closer together.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Your House.
I want to echo the encouraging words from Ms. Murillo for your last proposition. I mean, the idea of reaching out to our local youth and giving them an opportunity to step into this opportunity would be really great. And I know we've had tremendous success with some of those who have come from Santa Barbara. Officer Gutierrez, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
he's one of several, yes.
Adrian, and there's a whole group of them, and it's really wonderful because that local knowledge is important. And also to say, for those who aren't from Santa Barbara, to be able to go to an event like you're proposing here or you're going to have at Franklin Center is really a great way for them to begin to rub shoulders and make those kinds of friendships. A couple of things just to ask you. That crosswalk enforcement that was done recently, how'd that go? And I know that when people step off into the street and want to get across some of our wider streets like Milpas, it's they take their life into their hands. So how about a little report on that? I think you mentioned something in a previous time you came here, but I think it's important
yes,
for the
sir.
public to hear.
Yes, sir. I don't have the statistic in front of me today. We did write quite a few citations for individuals in vehicles who are not yielding to the pedestrians, and that was quite alarming. We were there for quite a while, and even though folks could even see the motorcycles, they continued to not yield for the pedestrians. So we had some pretty close calls. We certainly had some officers crossing the streets and other individuals who were assisting us, and the numbers just kept going higher and higher. Speed was an issue, but clearly not watching for the pedestrians. So I don't have the statistics in front of me, but it was quite the day, and we wrote quite a few citations for that violation.
I want to say I hope you continue doing that. It had been, at least when I came here in 1974, I was surprised to see how people did stop for people who got to a curb and were about to step off, and it was sort of part of the Santa Barbara lifestyle that you would stop for pedestrians crossing the street, and that'd be nice to see more of that happening, and your enforcement helps that. Over the years, you and I have had a chance to be at different community meetings, and this is a topic that I don't think we've discussed recently, but I know it's sensitive for some. And it's really important that people feel comfortable calling you when there's an issue, no matter who they are here in our community, no matter what their background or their ethnicity or whatever. And I think you're the one that really helped me understand how important it was for you to distinguish your role in our police department here from the role of the immigration, those who are enforcing the immigration laws, and ICE. And I know from time to time we have a cooperative relationship with them, but I just wanted to hear from you, because we haven't talked about this for a long time, how we distinguish ourselves and how we make sure that people know that when there's a dangerous situation, even inside their own homes, or something that they feel that they need to report, that they wouldn't hold back in reporting it for fear of in the process that the police department of Santa Barbara would be coming in as if they were, in some jurisdictions, as we know, they're doing that. They're being deputized as immigration agents. That you're distinguishing yourself somehow so people know that they can be safe in calling you and not be mistaken or mixed up in something like that. Can you help me understand that better? Because that's a very important distinction for the community to understand.
We do have a partnership with ICE for one specific issue, and that is for individuals that they're looking for that have committed crimes here and in another country. They're wanted. They're all adults, and they are wanted individuals, much like the wanted individuals who are from this country. They're criminal. We do not go to the locations and assist them. But they finally, we have a great understanding that when they're in our city, that they do call my office to tell me that they're in our city. So when we get the calls, we know where they are. Yes, you're right. There are several cities in California who train their municipal police officers to be immigration agents and to enforce immigration laws. We do not do that in the city of Santa Barbara. It is not on our strategy sheet to do. I think that we do a really good job of representing everyone in this community, but yes, there are certain aspects or people in our community who still fear the police. They don't trust the police. That still happens everywhere. But we do not get involved with ICE during arrest or raids of any sort. But we are aware when they're here to pick up a criminal that's wanted, many times wanted by another agency in this country. So that's the only time right now in Santa Barbara that we get involved with that. Other than that, we don't get involved.
Is there a part of the booking process that actually then creates an interface there, or is that something? I mean, I just want to be sure I truly understand that,
yes.
Because, and not just me, but whomever's watching.
Well, there is a process that does happen automatically at the county jail. If an individual is arrested in the city and is booked at the county jail and is an undocumented person, they may end up getting interviewed by ICE. ICE travels the state and goes to county jails and interviews individuals who might fall into that box. And they're interviewed there at the sheriff's department. We as a police department do not call ICE and tell them that we've just arrested a person that is about to go to the county jail that we believe is undocumented. We do not do that. It's not part of our policy. But once we book them into the county jail, they belong to the sheriff, and they have a much larger partnership with ICE, and ICE they do conduct interviews of certain individuals, and at times they're either deported or other options. But that has nothing to do with our police department.
It's not our practice when we are interviewing somebody or we're dealing with them in any of our direct interface to suspect them of being here illegally or something like that. We're not involved in that at that point.
Well, we may ask questions that will lead us into finding out whether they're undocumented or not, but we do not. It is not our policy to have specific questions to ask if they're here.
Thank you.
Especially if they're victims, especially if they're witnesses. We're just not going to do that.
Thank you very much. Well, the last thing I wanted to say, and I really appreciate you being here, and I like these opportunities to talk with you. And I'm disappointed a little bit that there's not more of the public here to have an opportunity to have this kind of interface. I was prepared today to listen for questions and things from the public, and then if there were things that we could, really resonate with us here on council, we could be asking you questions and really amplifying the 2 minutes people have to speak. Yeah. And it's surprising that there's no one here today, and I would really like to see. I think Ms. Murillo's right on that. I would really want to make sure that people know this is a great opportunity to have a direct relationship with the City Council and with you to do this. And thank you very much, by the way, for the good job that you're doing.
Thank you very much. I forgot one subject, and that is our command post vehicle that we've been using around town. We've been using it quite a bit, at least once a week, and it's worked out very, very well. In fact, recently, because of that and because of some of our connections with the Milpas Group, I wanted to share with you that the issue of RV parking on Milpas has been taken care of. It's an issue that was an issue for the business community specifically, and it's moving forward in a positive way. The exact locations where RVs were being parked were 300 North Milpas, 900 East Gutierrez, and 900 East Haley Street. Recently, as of last week, no RV parking signs were posted, and we continue to get a lot of phone calls and thank yous from the Milpas Group in terms of what we did there and why. The command post vehicle goes out at least once a week. The community is now approaching us more and more. Interestingly enough, we had one day where someone went around saying that it was an immigration bus. And we had to put Adrian out there to tell the community, no, this is the police department. And we literally went door to door and brought people, and some of them were actually laughing because someone had spread the rumor that ICE was on the west side and to avoid that large bus. But fortunately, we took care of that, and we had quite a few residents come. And we had some great dialogue with the community members there. So it's happening at least once a week, and I believe it's one of those things that is helping us tremendously to make that connection, especially with the business community that we're out there.
Mr. Hotchkiss?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, that's exactly the question I was going to ask you, because the Milpas folks got a hold of me and said, we want to see more of that. How soon and where it's important that it's really visible, because just being there has an impact before you do anything. So where's it going next? Do you know on Milpas?
No, my beat coordinator, some of who are here today, what they're doing in their neighborhood watch meetings and their meetings with the business community, they're scheduling them as needed and where needed. And we don't want to get into a set schedule. We want to go where it's needed. And if we find out a need today, even though we were there yesterday, we're going to put it out there again today. And they're in constant contact with the business community and the residents. And so we don't have a set schedule, except that it's out there at least once a week somewhere in the community.
Put Alan Bleeker on your email list of notifying people of the community if he's not already, because he's one of the ones that said we need to get that back. We haven't seen enough of it. Maybe he's just working too hard, but let's let people know that you're there.
We'll do that.
Second question. generally, then we got an uptick in car thefts. What's taken? Is this what we had 20 years ago, radios, or is it mobile units, or just anything that happens to be inside the car?
Well, it's all of that. Right now, in terms of our car thefts, they're not really taking the cars. They're jumping in and taking what's in them, sometimes radios and things like that. But our car thefts are down a little bit. It's mostly the burglary from the vehicle for the items that are inside. Again, crime of opportunity. They don't want to get caught. They want in and out, go, keep it, sell it, use it, give it away.
Is that probably drug-related then?
Well, again, it's sometimes not. It's hard to say.
Okay.
Some of the people we've arrested clearly don't have a substance abuse problem. They just decided they like that purse, they like that jacket, and they're going in. Most of them juveniles.
Hopefully they learned that lesson. On the tagger uptick, you said it's because some people got released. This always puzzles me because a tagger is basically signing his name to something. Should we not be able to go say, thank you, come with us?
Well, what we do, part of the process is before it is painted over, and we can't go on private property, we wish we could, to take care of some of the blight that's out there, you know, climb the fence and paint on it like some of the gas stations around here who are gated away. You can see all the graffiti from the street. It makes the city look bad. But yes, we have a process that before it's painted out, we take plenty of photos. Public Works does, we do. And one of the things that we do, this is no secret, because even though I'm going to say what I'm going to say, kids are still going to tag. We have a great relationship with all the schools. And we literally, my beat coordinators and other folks, YSS folks, go onto the school campuses and start looking, and we ask the teachers and we train the teachers, are you seeing some interesting doodling on notebooks, on desks? And many times you wouldn't believe how many times that's where our suspect is. So we've got a great partnership with the schools and with Public Works, so we're dealing with it pretty aggressively.
Well, that's good because people really are offended by that, and I think are starting to realize that it's not necessarily gang-related. It can be others. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. White?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My questions are in the same vein as Mr. Hotchkiss's. First of all, on the crimes of property, the city has really stepped up the investment in enforcement resources, and we're satisfied with this is a good number that we have. However, are there not things in the crimes of property, a strategy that's clearly there's much of it in place already, but a way of upgrading that strategy such that just Neighborhood Watch is an example of that, but basically stepping back a couple of steps on the issue and saying, how can we attack this thing on a wider scale, pre-enforcement, prevention, obviously. Perhaps that this is an opportunity or not an opportunity. There's that need to upgrade that preceding effort before we have to have an enforcement situation. Can you speak to that, please?
Part of that is something we already do, and part of that has to do with the partnerships that we have with the Sheriff's Department and with the Tri-County area law enforcement agencies. Our property crime detectives meet and discuss things. When we have an issue of a specific crime in property, we are sending out information and input and asking for input, asking other agencies in our Tri-County area if they're having the same issues, because several times it might be the same suspects. That happened last year when we arrested all those burglars up in San Roque who were from Bakersfield, Las Vegas, and Los Angeles. And we knew who we were looking for in one specific case because they were from Los Angeles. LAPD, LASO were victims. And we found the van in Goleta. We followed it into Goleta, and those were the guys that were wanted by LAPD, LASO, and us. So there's already a process to do that way. In-house, we have a variety of strategies that we utilize to investigate and take care of business beforehand as best we can. But I'm not at liberty to share all of that, but we do have specific strategies for that. But even with that, we continue to get kicked around a little bit with that crime, and My folks are trying very hard to bring that to an end.
And I appreciate that. At the same time, what I'm thinking about, of course, is more not what's going on in-house or not what's going on amongst the enforcement community, which, of course, we need and appreciate, but rather with the citizens ourselves. Is there the potential for an expanded, I'm imagining there's always a potential for expanding an effort in a particular area. Is that something that you might consider looking at and bringing back to the community as how do we step this up in some way as citizens to complement, obviously, your efforts?
What we're doing with that, and we just started that probably 2 months ago when we enhanced the beat coordinator system, is this. We have our ComStat meetings every month. Some of you have been to those meetings where we discuss strategies and crime, and we look at the pin maps as where the crimes are occurring and what we're doing about it. What's happening now is the beat coordinators are going to those meetings as well. And when the beat coordinators look up on a map and see a specific, let's say it's the Mesa area that has a burglary problem, my beat coordinators are taking that information from ComStat and canvassing that community and beginning neighborhood watch meetings, taking detectives there to meet with people in that community, what to watch out for, who we're looking for. So we're doing that education piece through the beat coordinators, and it seems to be working fine. The communities appreciate it. They know they're being hit by crime because neighbors are talking to neighbors. What my beat coordinators are now doing on a weekly basis is conducting a variety of meetings in the areas where we're having the most crime with those specific people. And that's the extent of it at this point.
Yeah, it may help. I would appreciate getting that quantified a little bit. You're giving us a bunch of statistics, but to get some kind of feedback, I appreciate you don't want to be divulging strategies to the opposition, as it were, but to the extent that you can share some of that preventative information in the future, I'd appreciate hearing about that.
Yes, sir.
And then secondly, on the tagging, if I'm reading this chart correctly, I would get the impression that there's less tagging going on today than there was last year. And I'm not feeling that at this point. So can you describe that a little more? And
Well, I feel your pain, and so can Jim, because Jim and I have the specific wall in our community that gets hit all the time. And even though we don't see it anywhere else, as far as I'm concerned, it's ridiculous and it's happening all over the city because I can see it.
Right.
And I think that's part of the issue with our community. Some don't see it, some do. Again, the tagging is down, but it is amazing that the majority is not gang related. Probably, maybe 10% is gang related. The rest is not. We're arresting young people from Montecito, from affluent families who are out there doing this tagging, and it's just amazed us. But about 10% is probably gang related. The rest, 90%, is not. And that's an issue for us.
And again, it would almost be like you might even call it a crime of property. Again, what are things that citizens can do? Again, this could be an opportunity for a conversation, one update or another. What can we do as citizens to improve that situation? That would be a good topic. It's just, obviously, it's an area of extreme frustration for all of us. So
I think what if I can be so bold as to tell you that at my next update, we'll focus on that. I'll get together with Public Works and what they're doing in partnership with us, and bring some more concrete statistics and concrete stories and successes with what we're doing with Public Works, because I think you'd be very interested
and
to see that.
opportunities to do better is obviously an element too.
It'll be on my agenda next month or whenever I come back.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Rouse.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Chief, first of all, I'd like to extend kudos once again for your cooperation, your department's cooperation with David Silberg and his group. I think that's a big factor. Regarding the gang activity or the downward trend gang activity, I would like to think that a lot of that has to do with the implementation of, or the re-implementation, I should say, of your beat coordinate a program, your police presence out there. And as I look at the goals, I know I'm jumping ahead a bit because you'll be doing your presentation later. In terms of staffing and maintenance and maintaining the beat coordinator system, and I realize that a lot of those things that involve police presence don't really produce statistics. But I can tell you anecdotally that what's going on now is effective, and it is working. It is working in the neighborhoods, and I talk to folks in the neighborhoods. It's working in the downtown when I talk to the merchants. And the Milpas folks are starting to see more and more presence, especially with the work of Adrian Gutierrez and what's going on over there. So is there anything in your performance plan or report coming up that indicates to us that your plan is to maintain that system and to keep that police presence at the levels that it's at, and disbursement or deployment, I should say, of resources the way you're doing now?
That's the goal. The goal is to keep those beat coordinators there. It's not just an issue of crime, as you mentioned. It's an issue of quality of life issues in our community. Blight breeds crime. And you're right, and I thank you for mentioning the beat coordinators. They're doing a wonderful job, and a lot of the gang issues are going away because they're out there. And that's making a big difference. So I think that our goal is going to continue to be that we continue the beat coordinator system. I'd like to enhance it by one maybe, but we're doing fine right now. We have Sergeant Harwood who's supervising that team, also working as a beat coordinator, and we have 4 fine beat coordinators working very, very hard, attending as many meetings as possible, and really setting up meetings in order to partner with community projects. So we're on it. They're extremely busy, and they love what they're doing, and they do a wonderful job. And I think that is one of the biggest reasons, other than arresting folks, that I believe is bringing down the crime. The goal is to keep it that way. As you know, I did not bring back the DARE officer, so I can keep the beat coordinator. I just think it's really important. I think it's high time that we go back to basics, to the walking down the street like they're doing, to the getting out of the cars like we're doing, and we've talked about that here in this chamber. So I think taking us back to basics is helping us out in a variety of areas, and my goal is to keep them staffed.
Thank you.
Thank you for all the good questions. Last time I mentioned, and you followed up with an email, and I meant to bring it, and then I forgot about the realignment issue dealing with jail overcrowding, and then the governor's proposal of sending state prisoners to the county jails, and how that impacts us. And I know today, excuse me, in the Board of Supervisors hearing, there was another report. I didn't get a chance to, I don't know if it happened this afternoon or this morning, but a report to the Board of Supervisors about the jail, the overcrowding, and also issues related to mental illness and the programs, the services in jail that's happening there. And maybe in a future meeting we can figure out how are we affected by that one way or another in terms of what's happening with the jail system, with overcrowding, how our restorative policing and a jail discharge program is interacting or not. I know they are well, but it'd be good to get an update on those couple of things too, because I am concerned with the jail overcrowding issue, and especially with the realignment that people will end up in our city streets, and it'll be our PD who then responds to calls for service related to any kind of problems that may occur due to those changes in early releases or whatever. You saw the statistics you show someone, and you can see the cause and the effect, right? You arrest someone, they go to jail, the incidents go down, they come back out, and look at that, the incidents go back up again. So I don't know if you want to add anything to this point or just wait for the next meeting, but I'd appreciate an update on that.
What I'll tell you today is that we are working on strategies for this realignment and how it's going to affect the city of Santa Barbara. I don't have them in front of me, but other than the graffiti issue with Public Works and that partnership, at our next get-together, whenever that is, I'll bring you an extensive strategy for us in Santa Barbara.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't see any other lights on. Thank you very much, Chief. That was
Thank you,
a lot
Mayor
of
and
questions.
Council. Appreciate your support. Thank you.
Okay. Any council member committee assignment reports? Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There is a heartbeat in the development community. A couple of Planning Commission items I wanted to run by you. Let's see, first of all, we didn't have last week we didn't do the report in, but the previous week the Planning Commission reviewed, there was an effort to have the car wash, which has been approved at Coast Village Road, but with a condition that the developer's not happy with. It was an attempt to get that reconsidered at Planning Commission, which did not succeed. So at this point, at least the last that I've heard, there will be an appeal to the council on a condition of approval of the car wash on Coast Village Road. And then there have been two concept reviews, one that week, April 5th, of a house at, which has been one of the longest live projects in the city of Santa Barbara at 1837 and a half El Camino de la Luz. That project had a concept review, and then more recently there was a concept review of the Roma Santa Trust addition to the hotel, and this project is at 101 State and 16 West Mason. So two concept reviews, which then will translate into more formal projects.
Okay. Mr. Rouse?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. At the last regular meeting of the Downtown Parking Committee, SB CAG presented their latest attempt at trying to mitigate some traffic issues caused by City College and downtown employee commuters. And it's a presentation called Smart Ride, and where people can register and carpool via their smartphones. And the rest of that, the other thing that was presented was the PBIA report, which will be coming before council for approval in the next couple of weeks, I think.
Great.
Thank you.
Ms. Murillo?
Thank you. I attended a meeting of the Youth Council last night. There's a speak out being organized related to environmental issues and teen rights. And the last meeting of the Housing Authority Commission, they talked about refinancing SHIFCO and Via La Cumbra to make capital improvements. And then I also attended a memorial service for Kim Johnson, an airport employee who passed away, and he used to work for Parks. It was a lovely ceremony, and I just send my good thoughts and wishes to his family and his coworkers. They're really missing him. So,
Thank you. Mr. Hotchkiss?
Nothing so weighty as the previous reports, just to say that Mr. Rouse and I took our life in our hands and set off the extravaganza stampede at Chase Palm Park, where if you get in the way of kids and eggs, you're in trouble. So they did a great job. Everybody had a great time, I think.
I think it starts at 10 a.m. and it's over at 10:01.
Exactly.
Something like that. Yesterday, I attended a LOSAN meeting in Anaheim. LOSAN is the Joint Powers Authority that oversees the rail corridor from San Diego up to San Luis Obispo. I serve as the alternate member through SB CAG. Supervisor Carbajal is the SB CAG member, and he couldn't make it, so I attended. And I bring it up because a main issue that's coming up through LOSAN that may come to us in terms of a request for support is a state bill. It's a Senator Padilla bill, SB 1225, which would allow for the LOSAN to take over the management and operation and policy of the corridor, of the passenger and commuter rail corridors from San Diego up through San Luis Obispo. Right now, that's through Caltrans in the Division of Rail. So this is dealing with Metrolink, with Amtrak. I mean, it's a pretty big deal. It's similar to the legislation that happened for the Capital Corridor, which is between Sacramento and San Jose. It gives a lot of local control to that Joint Powers Authority to look at everything from timetables to Wi-Fi in the train, which currently happens already, but, just the general operations and then being the one to look at capital improvements and finding the funding and so forth. So there is legislation that's passing. There was supposed to be a hearing today that I was going to attend, but they postponed the hearing till next week, and so the chair of LOSAN and another member will be there next week. So just stay tuned because that might come to us. And also some good news. I recently found out through Jim Kemp, Executive Director at SB CAG, that lately, the 101 freeway expansion going all the way to through Ventura is really, there are 4 phases of it. As you know, phase 1 was just completed. We had that big ceremonial piece at the Cacique underpass. Phase 2 is just about to get started. That's from Muscle Shoals up to the Rincon, and there's a kickoff, I guess, at the end of the month about that. That's being funded through 1B funds. Those are bond-funded funds that were allocated, voted in by the voters a number of years ago. And then there are 2 more phases. Phase 3 has to do with 2 overcrossings in Carpinteria, widening the bridges there to accommodate for the 3rd lane, and just recently got funded. So that is now funded as well. So phase 1 is done, phase 2 is funded, about to start, phase 3 is funded and will be ready, going through its process now. And then phase 4, which is the big piece of it, the 3rd lane from Hot Springs down to Carpinteria, the environmental impact report is out, and there's some public hearings, I believe, in 2 weeks. No, next week. 2 public hearings that Caltrans is participating in, so I'm sure people will be interested in going to that public hearing, giving Caltrans their opinions about the environmental impact report. So just a little brief update, and SBCAG is meeting Thursday. We'll get another update at that point at the board meeting. But some good news about getting the funding that we need. And hopefully, finally, there's some new rail funding that may become available to accommodate the capital improvements along the rail corridor to assist with commuter rail opportunities in our area. So a lot going on in that area. Okay, item number 8, if you could read that.
Item number 8, conference with labor negotiator.
Okay, and we won't have anything to report from there, so we'll adjourn from closed session. Thank you.